Hello, we're Steve and Mary Alessi, pastors of Metro Life Church, and we're really delighted that you chose to join us today as part of our online campus. Now at Metro, we are all about the 3 R's: relationship, relationship, relationship. What does that mean? It means we value relationship with God being first and foremost. Also, relationship with each other. People who walk through the doors of our church, we value those relationships. And then relationship with people outside of our church walls, which is why we believe this online campus is so important. It's allowing us to connect with you.
This is us getting to know you, and we're excited to do that. If you haven't had a chance yet, would you subscribe to our YouTube channel? Turn your notifications on so every time we go live or every time we post a video, you have quick access to it. And we hope that this message will be a blessing to you and it will encourage your walk with the Lord.
Most of you know that our story is pretty active. Our family, not our story, our family is pretty active in everything we do in the ministry. So you have at this campus Pastor Christopher and his wife Rochelle. You also have Minister Stephanie and her husband Muina. Stephanie and Christopher being our children. My wife Mary is down at our Dadeland campus, and she has with her our daughters Lauren and our daughter Gabby. Gabby being the youngest. Now, many of you know her because she leads up our youth ministry, and she also does our announcements on the screen here. And she's getting married in like a month. So we're pretty excited about that for her. This morning she woke up, as she does pretty much every morning, and she comes over to my side of the bed, which is furthest from the door, sorry Mary, and she always comes over and gives me a kiss. And I said to her today, Gabby, we've got about 5 more Sundays of this happening. From this point on, after 5 Sundays, you'll be kissing him, hopefully on the forehead. But when Gabby was about 5 years old, Gabby was always a very active young lady. And we were at Walgreens one day, and she loved picking up little things here and there and wanting to take them home for us to pay for them and everything. But she grabbed a little bottle of nail polish, and when she put it in the basket, it fell through the basket, the wires of the shopping cart. So she took the little bottle of nail polish, thank you, and she put it in her pocket, only to go home and realize that she stole it. It was not paid for. And she was so embarrassed and didn't want to bring it to our attention that she went into the bathroom and poured her fingernail polish in the sink. Well, how many of you know at 5 years old, she's not real good about hitting the middle of the sink where the water goes down? It was all over the sink. And of course, she came out crying for 2 reasons. The biggest of which, she knew she was going to get in trouble. The second was, how in the world are we going to clean it up? Which we did clean up. But here's the lesson that we learned from that little scenario. One small action that you try to fix yourself can turn into a much bigger mess. Which is the case, actually, in Abraham's story. Let me give you a quick overview of what occurred with him. In Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram at 75 years of age. That's old. He's lived some life up to this point. But God calls him and promises then to make him into a great nation. In Genesis chapter 15, God repeats the promise, but Abram says, Lord, what can you give me seeing I don't even have a child? It says you're going to be a father of many nations, but Abram is saying back to the Father, to God, I don't even have a son. In Genesis chapter 16, about 10 years go by, and still Abram and Sarai have no children. But she chooses to take matters into her own hands, and she introduces Hagar as a handmaiden into the equation. In Genesis chapter 17, now Abram is 99 years old. God changes their names to Abraham and Sarah. He sets the covenant or restates the covenant and promises that Sarah will have a son. And then Genesis chapter 21, finally, 25 years later, the promise is fulfilled and Isaac is born. Now, you would think up to this point that this would pretty much be the happy ending that they were believing for, right? But that's not the case. Because then comes Genesis chapter 22, which will prove to be Abraham's hardest test yet in this scenario. God now asks Abraham to take this son that he had waited 25 years to birth, to now go to the mountain and sacrifice him there. Now, you and I could sit back all these years later and we will wonder, why would God ask Abraham to sacrifice his only son? The reason is because now God wanted to test Abraham's heart. Remember this, even the Bible tells us that man can see on the outward appearance of another man. You and I judge people by what we see, by what we hear them say, by their outward appearance. But the scripture says only God knows the heart. So God wanted to test what Abraham's heart looked like so that Abraham would then be qualified to be the father of many nations. Now, we've learned in life that sometimes you and I don't really know a person until they've been pressed and they've been stretched. We think we know them, but we really don't know them until they're put under the pressure of life. And that's what occurs right here. That here God had promised Abraham that he is going to be this father of many nations by birthing a son. And then when he has that son, he's put then to the ultimate test. Now let me tell you what that says to you and I today. Because you and I want God's best for our life. Am I right? Come on, with the upraised hand. How many of you want God's best for your life? Well, if you want God's best for your life, here's what you got to be careful for. You know the old saying, be careful what you ask for? You got to be careful what you're really asking for there. I think a lot of us raise our hand on Sunday, but when we're put through the press and the stress of the test on Monday, we're quick to bring our hand a little bit lower because we're not sure that we're really qualified or want to go through what is needed to experience God's best. But I can tell you, God's best is the best that you'll ever experience in your life. So it's going to be worth the stress and the press that comes when you go through the test. So here we see this big test. We could call it really the test of a lifetime. And as I say that, and some of you are already processing in your mind some of the stuff you're going through right now or stuff you've been through. Some of you are actually thinking, man, am I really qualified for this? But let me encourage you with this one word before we go on. The reason this message applies for you is because of what the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, that displays this, that God won't let you to be tested beyond what you can bear. Mama, God won't let you to be tested beyond what you can bear. I had to say that to a precious saint in the Lord that has spent her entire life serving God and now is experiencing one of those tests. God knows exactly what you can bear. That's good news. On one hand, it's good news. On the other hand, you're like, I don't know if I want to experience that. The all-knowing God knows exactly what you can handle. So if you're going through one of those experiences right now where you're feeling like you're about to break, it's not because you've done something wrong. I don't believe. Now, I know sometimes we bring this mess on ourselves. And some of the mess that we bring on ourselves, we think, well, that's just God testing me. No, that was just bad choices and decisions that we made. But the test that comes to try you, it's proof that God's got something better for you, even though it's heavy. So we see this coming to Abraham. Though it seemed like his son would be the promise fulfilled, it's not. God asked Abraham now to take that precious answer to prayer, Isaac, the son that he waited 25 years for. And I believe the son at this time when this request from God is presented to Abraham would have been between 5 to 7 to 8 years of age. So we're not talking about a little boy. We're talking about a child that God, or that Abraham would have waited 25 years to birth, and then was able to bond with him for another 5 years or so. So you're talking 30 years in this scenario. And now God comes back to Abraham and says, bring your son to the altar, to the mountain, build an altar, and sacrifice him there. Guys, this is big. This is big. But you know why God was asking Abraham to test him here with this? It's because God wanted to answer a question, or have Abraham answer this question. Who is your source, Abraham? All these years later, he's asking you and I. When we experience that kind of test, who is your source? Gosh, I could take you through periods of my own life where that test has caused me to question. And whether I'm sitting here in this church listening to a sermon, or whether I'm in the shower trying to take care of my hair, there'll be so many occasions where I hear that little voice from God. Steve, who is your source? Whether it was waiting for the time when I was looking for a spouse, came out of college, I thought I had one, and God took that right off the plate, and I remember being so overwhelmed by that, crying out to God, what gives? Talked to a buddy of mine, he said, listen, Steve, all I can tell you is this. When God takes steak off your plate, he always replaces it with steak and lobster. And he did. She's wearing green down south today. She's the lobster that gave me some little lobsters along the way. I'm happy for that. Wouldn't trade that for anything. But did I know it then? When it came time for us 28 years ago to come out of working with my dad and mom. And it was a pretty sweet experience. But to walk away from that with a few brave friends and souls to come start our church, heard that same voice. Who's your source? Who are you going to trust? And every so often, when it was needing resources of people, resources of property, resources of finance, whenever those experiences or tests comes along the way, on our way to what I know is a greater life for Alessi and for our Metro Life family, I have to answer that same question. Who is my source? And so do you. If you want greatness in your life, you're going to be asked that question on a number of occasions. Who is the source to provide for you your dreams? Abraham shows us in his story 3 wrong choices. He shows us, number 1, the source of self. You know, at 75 years of age, you think this guy could pretty much handle anything. I mean, isn't it the whole deal? The longer you live, you start to realize, you know, life isn't really that complicated. So when someone comes to you after 75 years of living and asks for your advice, you can give it to them because you've lived through some things. As the commercial says, you know a thing or two because you've seen a thing or two. So it's very easy for you to think that, hey man, I've got it together. If you've built a successful anything, it's easy to think, look what I can do. I'm pretty good. I can build this family. I can build this marriage. I can build this ministry. I can build this business. It's very easy to begin thinking when we look in the mirror, look what I have done. Oh, sure, we show up to church on Sunday and we can sing the old song, look what the Lord has done. Look what the Lord has done. But Monday through Saturday, we look in the mirror and think, look what I have done. We can become our own source. I think Abraham did that. When God first promises Abraham a son, he looks at himself, says, well, Lord, what can you give me? How can I be a father of many nations when at 75 years of age, I have no children? The mindset is, if I can just work harder, then I'll have more. If I can improve myself, then I'll have more. If I can just be stronger, then it'll happen. But the reality is the best version of ourselves is not enough for God's best. We will come into the realization that our best isn't even good enough for God's best for our life. We as a staff, some of us are chaplains in our local, Pastor Chris and I are chaplains for our Doral Police Department, but we're also chaplains at the School of Justice, which trains young men and women across South Florida to go and work at the different law enforcement agencies, as well as corrections, FHP, and even corrections. So we get there and we've learned to watch these young students, and what they experience through their schooling is some of the most extreme conditions that they're going to find themselves put under. And they're introduced to who they really are not. They all go in thinking they know who they are, but it's not until they experience the stress and the pressure that they realize who they are isn't good enough. So they need one another. They need the community of the other officers. They need prayer. They need God. And all of us will learn that same lesson over time, like even Sarah had to learn. She overheard the promise that was given to Abram, and she laughed because she thought about her own age and how old she was. And she knew that if this was going to happen, this was going to have to be a God thing. But she couldn't do much about it. Here's what you and I will learn when we're under this kind of stress. And that is that our limitations don't limit God. They'll only limit ourselves if we are our own source. How about the source of work? Sarah introduced Hagar to make up for her limitations. And that wasn't faith. That was works. And works will never replace faith. So who do you place your trust in? Is it your work? Now, work is good. We all need to work. But work alone will not fulfill God's promise in our lives. Sometimes work just will bring more stress, anxiety, and frustration. Because it's like the old preacher said one time, work, don't worry, because worry don't work. You can't worry enough to get yourself into God's best for your life. I mentioned my daughter, Gabby. Let me talk about my daughter, Stephanie, who is my namesake, and she handles our praise and worship. Stephanie and I share a certain issue. And that is, it's like we just don't know when to turn off the work switch. Everything's about the next. And as nice as that is, as it plays out in our profession, it could hurt us in our marriage, can hurt us in even ministry. Because what happens when you and I keep our foot on the pedal, always having to work, always having to go faster, is a couple of things. First, the worry and the stress and the anxiety. Because we feel like we could never just do enough. You know what I'm talking about? There's always more to be done. The second is this: when we do accomplish something, we don't always settle in to say, thank you, Lord, I'm blessed by this. Instead, we start thinking, okay, that's done. We mark it off the list. Now let's go to our next thing. And that can create a lot of stress and anxiety in our life because we think work becomes our source and our provider. And though you and I have to always work super hard, I want you to know the job is not our provider. This ministry here, as beautiful as it is, and please don't take offense to this. Please. And I want to say to our Dayland campus, don't be offended by what I'm about to say. You ready? You are not my provider. I don't mean that in a negative way or a disrespectful way. And I so appreciate the faithfulness of our church people to serve at these campuses, to go out and help us as a staff, and to financially provide and give. I thank you for all those things. But Metro is not going to depend on work, on provisions of others. As we work together, we know God is our source. Do you? Is your work your source? Some will do it. I know that because some won't come to church because of work. May not work Sunday. Some of them just don't go Sunday because they've worked Monday through Saturday and they're exhausted. So it's easier to catch Pastor Steve and Metro right here online. And we're grateful that you can do so. But this, being in the house of God, has to be a priority in our life. Our work can never be our source, because the truth is, your work could be over tomorrow. Then what? Here's another challenge we have. It's the source of others. Finally, when Isaac is born, Abraham could have thought, now I've got it, my son's my source, this is how I'm going to be the father of many nations. But God said, no, I got to nip that right now. So he tested Isaac by making sure that if he was going to be the father of many nations, it wasn't going to be on the back of Isaac, it was going to be on God's watch. God's the one who called him to be a father of many nations. If you go and read Genesis chapter 1 and you just go down, Genesis chapter 12, and you go down a few verses, you can count how many times God says, and I will, I will, I will. God says, I'm going to be the one that does this, not other people. Which sometimes you and I put it on other people to be our source. I don't mean this, again, in a bad way, but look, your spouse will never make you completely happy. You can't expect your spouse, or your spouse to be your source of happiness. They're going to work real hard to make you happy, but happiness has to be an inside job that you get with your provider, which is God. You can't let your kids be your provider. Your kids can't be your source for happiness and fulfillment in life. They're going to make mistakes along the way. They're going to make decisions that are not always going to benefit you, Daddy or Mommy. They're going to make decisions for themselves. And if you're like just putting all your cards on the table for them and they're the ones that's going to make you happy, that's an outside source that is not capable. Your spouse can't handle the weight of being your source. Your kids can't. Your friends can't. Your parents can't. So who can? Well, here, now we see a shift. Because God, who now blesses Abraham with his son Isaac, now turns around and says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, the one you love, and sacrifice him to me. Now, this is a big test. Now we're taking tests to a whole nother level. When I process that particular command, the truth of the matter, that doesn't just sound hard. That sounds impossible. To take who would have been my firstborn and only son and put him up on the altar and sacrifice him to God. But here's the thing. What looks unfortunate in the natural could be your greatest test. Now, I'm processing all of this, preparing for this sermon. And when I get to this point right here, I don't know if it was a little nudge of the Spirit, but it could be God saying something to somebody. Because my thought is, none of us could ever offer our son or daughter as a sacrifice to the Lord. But some have been required to do that. There's some people under the sound of my voice who have lost a son and daughter, and they passed. And you've had to make a sacrifice. A sacrifice that all of us would sit back and say is too great of a sacrifice. Some of you have lost a spouse. They're gone, and you're a widow. And it was too great a sacrifice to ask you to make. You didn't even want to make it. You didn't have a chance to decide to make it. But it was one that was made. And all I can say to that is what looks unfortunate in the natural could be your greatest test. Because God was saying to Abram, as he will say to each and every one of us, do you trust me, even with what you love the most? Do you trust me with that? Because sometimes God will test us with our abilities, and he's saying, what is in your hand? Will you give it to me? He'll test you with your love. What is in your heart? Will you give them to me? He's going to test you with your thoughts. What's in your head? This is what I believe. This is what I feel. God will say, will you give that to me? He'll test you with that, all that just to see if you're willing to lay it all down. And Abraham obeyed. Even when he didn't know the outcome, he had to get to a place where he said, God, I just trust you. So get this image in mind. If you can, a big mountain with Abraham and his son Isaac on one side. And God is asking him to do what seemingly is impossible. So he starts to make his way up the mountain. He has the donkey filled with the wood that he would build the altar with. He has the fire that he would then light that wood on the altar with. But what he doesn't have is the sacrifice. He knows in his heart, God has said, sacrifice your son to me. So he starts to make his way up the mountain. What he cannot see is what's happening on the other side of the mountain. Where now every step up the mountain Abraham makes, so does this provision that God has on the other side. And it finally gets to the tipping point where it's the do or die scenario. And Abram starts to take the wood off the back of his donkey and he begins to build the altar. And while he's building that altar, little Isaac is old enough to be able to see that there's an altar being built. And he knows already at a young age that altars are meant for sacrifices. Something's got to be put up on that altar. And he sees his dad building that altar, and then he sees the little container of fire that his father has that will be used to light that altar on fire to then now present the sacrificial animal. And so as he watches this play out, young Isaac turns to his dad and says, "Father, I see the fire and I see the wood, but where's the sacrifice?" And it's right there that Abraham utters these powerful words that we still hold on to today. Abraham says, "Son, God will provide." You see, those three words define one aspect of God that we know as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. That wasn't something that came from his feelings. That's something that came from revelation. Because Abraham knew that if he obeyed God and was willing to sacrifice the blessing that God had given him, then God would provide everything that would be needed. That's why going up the mountain, he didn't trip, stutter, or stall. He just made his way up because while he was doing his part, he trusted God as his source, that God would do his part. And sure enough, while Abraham went up one side of the mountain, though he couldn't see what God was doing, God was already planning the ram that would be the animal that would take the place of Isaac. And he would never be required to put his son on that altar, but what he was asked to do was just obey. So he did. Let me ask you this today. Are you willing to sacrifice everything that God asks you to just to be in obedience to God? Now, come on. Process that. That's a big deal. Put yourself in Abraham's shoes. Are you willing to throw it all up on the altar? Everything that you think you want, everything that you desire, are you willing to do that? Of course you're not. But will you? For the sake of having God's best for your life? Remember, God already said, I'm never going to ask you to do more than you're capable of doing. So the fact that he's asking you to sacrifice and lay it all down, he knows you have the ability to do it, but will you do it? Yes, you could do it, but will you? Some of you are saying, I'm not sure because I don't know what I'm going to get in return. You know something? That's a test every Sunday we have to take. Some of us want to do things on Sunday with our own time and our family members, but yet we choose to say, no, I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to come to the house of God. That's a big deal. That's why when we get here, we try our best to make you feel as good as possible because we know what it took for you to get here. Some of you actually moved back to Miami to be here. And we honor these young kids for that because it's a big deal. We got one of those happening down at Dadeland right now. A family moving back south to be a part of Metro because where they lived in the Carolinas didn't match up with what they had here in Miami with Metro. That's a big deal. How about your finances? You're looking right here at what you have in your bank account, and then you come to church and you hear us say it's time to give of your tithes and your offerings. And you're like, this is all I got. Are you crazy? If I give this away, how will I pay my bills? Same thing Abraham had to answer when he's going up the mountain. If I sacrifice my son, how will I be the father of many nations? When we don't know what the provision ultimately looks like, guys, that's when we are most vulnerable. But but it's also when we're most powerful. We've got Revive coming up, and we're going to have 5 services. And yes, we're asking you to be at every one of those services. And I know our Sunday morning crowd, our Metro family, you're like, I just do one a day on Sunday. So if I'm coming to Revive at night, I'm not gonna be there on Sunday morning. Or if I'm there Sunday morning, don't count on me on Sunday night. Or if I go Sunday night, I'm not going Monday night because I got this thing I got to do. Tuesday night, I'm going here. Wednesday night, I've got dance practice. I mean, my kids' sports, school, work, all of that is super important to your life. I got it. But we're hearing God call us to stir up a spirit of revive, to stir up what's been dead, to come closer to Him, to spend time in His presence. Let me tell you, God's going to respond when we show up and being willing to say, I sacrifice this for this. When we're willing to do that for God, it really proves who our source is. Yes, you could work instead of go to church. The moment you do that, you've just demonstrated that work is your source. I know about life one thing. You'll never have success without sacrifice. It's going to cost you something. Success always costs us something. So are you willing to sacrifice whatever is needed to walk in God's promise for your life? Because when you do, then God steps in. And like He did with Abraham, don't touch the boy, He says. I got to sacrifice to take his place. And then God says something powerful. He says, now I know that you trust me. And sure enough, the ram in the thicket comes, which is God's provision for Abraham. But if I was Abraham, I think I would be troubled by those words, now I know. Because if I'm Abraham, and I think I can associate a little bit as somebody who's lived my life completely. I'm not the most spiritual guy you'll ever run into. I promise you that. I'm definitely not the most spiritually gifted pastor that you'll ever meet. But I'm going to tell you this much. I strive my best to be righteous in every area of my life. I don't always get it right, but I strive my best. I strive to do my best to be righteous. So like Abraham, I would sit back and question, wait a minute. Go back to what you just said, God. What do you mean, now I know? I thought you knew everything about me. I thought I lived in a way that demonstrated who I was before you. What do you mean, now you know? You mean there was something about me that I didn't demonstrate to you? There was something about me that you didn't know? You knew me my entire life since I've been a kid. Is there something in my life that you didn't know? That would have stopped me in my tracks. Because I want to be fully known by God. And I know you do too. I know you desire for God to know everything about you and be pleased with everything about you. But maybe He's looking at you today and He's saying, there's something I don't know. And the only way that I could know it is when you're willing to put it all up on the altar. And sure enough, He did put it on the altar. And there, God said, now I know that I can trust you with my best for your life. Here's what I want to remind you of as I close this message. Yes, you have a dream and you've got a promise that you're holding on to. And God wants you to know that He, one, needs to be your source, your only source. Not your job, not your ability, not your connections. He has to be your source. And if you'll trust him, even when it costs you everything, then you'll see his provision, because he always provides on the mountain of obedience. So Metro, I hope you have a dream for your life. Even while you're carrying it for 25 years like he did, it's going to push you past your weakness. It'll build faith muscles that you didn't know you have. And ultimately, it's going to teach you this: when God is your source, you'll never lack for what you need in your life. Gosh, I hope this was landed and spoke to you. I hope it's encouraged you. I hope it's inspired you. And I just pray over all of you hearing me today, put your total trust and faith in God. He will provide for you. Amen. God bless you, Dadeland. Thanks for joining us today. And Metro, Terrell, I bless you, man. Come on, I bless you in the name of Jesus. Thank you again for letting me speak to that camera and ministering to people outside of these walls. But don't you ever doubt the goodness and the great things that God has for you, and be willing to pay the price for it. It's a great blessing on the other side of that price and sacrifice that you've got to make. I love you. God bless you. You may be seated.
Before
Thank
you check out and click off this video, listen, thank you for letting us speak into your life. Hopefully, the message you heard has inspired and encouraged you. Now, if you want to find out more about Metro Life, you can go to our website at metrolifechurch.com. And right there, you'll see more and more about what this ministry offers you. It's great to have you joining us online, but we want you to step into our world if you feel so compelled to do so. And if you would like to make a donation through an offering, you can do so, because right on your screen, there's a little tab for giving. Click on that tab. I promise you, you'll be blessed as you do give.
So thank you for watching with us. Thank you for joining our online campus family. We hope you have a great week, and we hope that if you're in the Miami area, that you would come and personally visit us so that we can shake your hand and get to know you. Have a great week.